Ask anyone in Tokyo and they'll tell you the same thing. That the number one pro hero, Todoroki Shoto, is the perfect hero. He's kind to everyone, always the first to arrive on a crime scene, always the calm and collected hero everyone wants him to be. It was ironic how things happened to lead Shoto to his current situation, him moaning and shuddering like a teenager, clinging to the strong, perfect body of the most wanted villain in Japan, Ground Zero. He and Ground Zero had been fighting one-on-one for over an hour. The other pro heroes were otherwise occupied by lesser villains, and Shoto was wearing out. The only consolation was that Ground Zero was wearing down too. His movements were slowing, and he'd lost a gauntlet some 20 minutes ago. Shoto had never felt more alive in his life. Ground Zero was his complete equal in every way. They matched punch for punch, strike for strike, neither breaking, neither relenting. It was exhilarating.
You're getting slow, Mr. Pro Hero.
Ground Zero's arrogant smirk doesn't faze Shoto anymore. They've had this stalemate for months, and the snarky blonde's quips didn't ruffle his feathers. Instead, he relished the fresh attitude. No one was ever cold to him. No one dared to turn their nose up at the number one hero the way Ground Zero was doing right now. He licks his lips and grins, his blood running hot even though his powers were weakening. Maybe he would die tonight. He'd be okay dying at the hands of his equal. No one would fault him for falling to the most wanted villain in the country, the villain that always succeeded and could never be caught.
Oi, pay attention to me, you half-and-half bastard.
Ground Zero yells, and Shoto braces for what he knows is a frontal attack. Another reason they stalemate is they both know each other too well by now. Sure enough, the feisty blonde launches towards him, but then does something new that catches Shoto completely off guard. He feints to the left and swings his legs out, hitting Shoto full in the stomach, knocking the breath out of his lungs and flinging him backwards to land harshly on his back. Ground Zero is on him in a second, pinning his arms to the sides with his legs, his hands slamming down on either side of his head. Shoto looks up at the blonde, dazed. He'd really let his guard down on that one. Was this it? He was tired from fighting, tired of always being looked at as the perfect hero, tired of having to hide all the time.
Oi, you still fucking spacing out? What the fuck is so important that you can't even focus on our fight, huh?
Shoto blinks and tries to focus on the burning red eyes above him. He'd never been this close to Ground Zero before. Their fights were always fought with range attacks and only a little sparring if needed. His eyes lazily trailed down the blonde's scratched-up cheeks, his strong jaw, his scowling mouth. He'd probably look gorgeous if he smiled. "Do you ever smile?" he asks, not paying attention to the vein popping from Ground Zero's forehead.
Huh? What the fuck?
It's enough for the villain to lean back, his weight briefly relaxing over Shoto's arm. It was enough. He puts all his remaining power in lighting up his left side. Ground Zero yelps and rolls off of him as flames lick at his pants, and now their roles are reversed.
The fuck, icy hot? You tricked me.
The blonde screams, and Shoto grins lazily at him, still wondering why he'd even tried. Guess he still wanted to live, even if for a little longer. "Sorry, Ground Zero. Guess I didn't want to die yet." He slams his palm into the blonde's neck and squeezes, choking off his next insult with a satisfying gagging noise. Oh, Shoto liked that. A hard friction jolts him as his prisoner jerks his hips up, grinding a very hard erection against Shoto's ass. The pro hero gasps and leans forward, eyes wide in surprise. That was the last thing he was expecting. Ground Zero looks at him intently. Even being choked, he was confident. Shoto wanted to break that irritatingly confident arrogance. He tightens his grip, settling his weight on the hard link behind him, wondering only briefly why he was playing along. He had the villain trapped and weakened. He should just cuff him and bring him to the agency. The thought melts as Ground Zero's eyes roll back and he lets out a strangled moan, thrusting his hips up to find friction. Shoto grits his teeth, biting back his own groaning moan climbing up his throat. He breathes out hard and leans down, loosening his grip slightly. "You like that?" he murmurs softly, earning a sneer from the flush villain.
Bite me, you pro-hero bitch.
He barks back immediately, and it makes Shoto smile. The blonde would fight him till the bitter end. Well, if you insist. He bites down on Ground Zero's neck without hesitation, making him jolt in surprise.
Fuck.
The blonde hisses, his hands instinctively going to Shoto's thighs, holding him down as he ruts up against the hero. Shoto moans against Ground Zero's neck, sinking his teeth deeper to break the skin, reveling in how the villain writhed under him. This was what he loved. He finally lets go, licking the wound slowly, feeling the villain tremble under him and buck his hips harder. This was too much. What was he doing? What were they doing? He leans back with a groan, trying to catch his breath. Ground Zero could have broken free easily at this point, but he didn't. He was looking at Shoto, eyes sparking with desire, breath heavy, matching Shoto's own labored breathing like a starved animal. You wanna... Shoto trails off, unsure of what he's even asking.
Yeah.
The blonde answers immediately, and Shoto gets up, letting the most wanted villain stand up and walk free without a second thought. He follows the blonde far away from the fighting, away from any prying eyes, and in the dark of an alleyway, Ground Zero lets Shoto push him against the wall in a frantic grinding of hips. He'd never been so turned on, and they were still fully clothed for fuck's sake. He slumps against the blonde, and they stay there, both catching their breath for a moment until sirens erupt in the distance, jolting them back to reality. Shoto wasn't sure what to say or do. Trying to resume their battle was furthest from his mind, and all he wanted to do was go home and sleep now. So, he starts, feeling awkward all of a sudden. He was never this spontaneous, especially with strangers. Probably why his sex life was so dismal at best.
Shut up. Give me your fucking phone. Quickly.
He starts in surprise, but digs his phone out, letting Ground Zero snatch it up. He probably should have been worried that the villain would steal it and use it as a means to blackmail him, but he wasn't. Or more like, he just didn't care. Ground Zero tosses the phone back and walks off towards the far entrance.
Later, loser.
He calls, and Shoto just stands there, staring at the blonde's back and then down at the new phone number in his contact list titled Fuck Buddy. Well, this was a twist of events. After that night, Shoto texted the blonde a week later. He calculated that a week was an appropriate amount of time to not look desperate, but also not uninterested. It was another 2 days before Ground Zero texted him back with a simple message giving an address. It could have been a trap. Anyone else would have brought backup to try and capture the villain, but Shoto didn't. He met at the specified time and place in civilian clothes and met up with the blonde for an hour of frantic fucking. Since then, they kept up a steady routine. They usually met once a week. It was almost comical how well they communicated without using words, as Shoto soon realized the villain was as bad at talking as the hero. It was amazing stress relief for both of them. Another thing that worked wonders was how fucking rough Ground Zero was with him. The man could take the pain as much as dish it out, and it sent Shoto's pulse racing every time. They never called each other any names. The villain had to know Shoto's name, but even seeing the guy's face without a mask and running a scan on the police computers produced 0 results for this blonde firecracker. It's like he didn't exist. The no-name thing didn't really bother Shoto until 3 months into their whatever this was. He didn't want to think about the why behind it. That was hitting too close to the part of him that he kept locked up tight during these encounters. The part that was starting to enjoy seeing Ground Zero, to look forward to their time together, not just the amazing fuck that would ensue. You know my name. It's only fair that I know yours. A futile excuse. The blonde could see right through him.
Why do you want to know all of a sudden, huh?
His hands start to slowly trail up and down Shoto's thighs, making the hero shiver at the light touch. The villain could be surprisingly gentle out of nowhere, and it always shocked him. Just never mind. He flushes, turning his head away. He should have kept his damn mouth shut. Damn it. The blonde is quiet for a moment, and that was never a good sign. He was thinking, calculating. observing every little detail of Shoto to ascertain the reason behind his random-ass question. Good God. Shoto squirms under the scrutiny until he feels the blonde lean over him again.
I know,
he says slowly, a shit-eating grin spreading across his face.
You want me to say your name, but you don't want to ask. So you thought if you did it first, I would follow suit.
Fucking goddamn, why was he so smart? Shoto flushes hard and licks his lips. Of course he was right. He'd had so many wet dreams about hearing Ground Zero call out his name as he releases or when he talks dirty, calling him a little bitch.
If you can last longer than me, I'll tell you,
he says finally, his voice holding a hint of something Shoto hadn't heard before. Suddenly, his request held a lot more weight now. It sounded like something important to Ground Zero. A milestone. But why? Not like they were in a relationship. Was it that big a deal? But the fact that the blonde looked serious for that 1 second was enough. This was a big deal. Shoto gulps. He was already close. The blonde knew where his weak spots were to make him a whimpering puddle, but... And if you win, he says, finally, voice straining to sound calm. The blonde leans down so their noses touch, his warm breath ghosting over Shoto's lips suggestively.
I want a kiss,
he whispers, and good God, Shoto's heart almost bursts because that's been the one thing he hasn't allowed in this situation. Kissing was intimate. Kissing was for couples, lovers, not fuck buddies. Fine, he just couldn't lose. He would never back down from a challenge, and he knew Ground Zero wouldn't either. Deal, he murmurs, and it's like a light switch flipping. They fall back without a word, both trying to catch their breath. It was a draw. A fucking draw.
Kotsky,
the blonde murmurs softly, not looking at the hero. Shoto sits up to lean over the blonde, trying to see his face. He was flushed and breathing hard and looking so wrecked it made Shoto's chest ache. Kotsky, he says back, and the blonde whips his head to look at him, eyes intent on his mouth, so he says it again. Kotsky licks his lips and breathes out shakily.
Shoto.
Damn, that wasn't good. Shoto's breath hitches and his heart soars at how fucking good his name sounded coming from the blonde. Yeah, he asks, and Kotsky raises his hand, cupping the hero's scarred left cheek.
You owe me a kiss.
He did. They had tied, and good God did Shoto want to kiss the blonde. He wanted to kiss Kotsky. He gulps thickly and nods, leaning down slowly. Kotsky's red eyes are intense like burning rubies, but as he gets closer they close, waiting patiently. After all the fucked up shit they had done to each other, this kiss was the hardest thing to do. His heart pounds painfully against his ribs as he stops just before making contact. Kotsky waits, more patient than he's ever been, and Shoto feels the slight tremble run through his body. He really wanted this. They both really wanted this simple act of affection. Fuck it. He would deal with the emotional aftershocks later. Shoto presses his lips to Kotsky's gently, like you would to a newborn baby, and the blonde lets out a shuddering breath, leaning his head up for more contact. The hero obliges, closing his eyes and letting a little bit of his caged feelings loose as he increases the contact, moving his lips against the blonde's with a small moan. Kotsky groans against his mouth, moving both hands to cup Shoto's cheeks and gently pulling him down closer, deepening their kiss. Hot waves of pleasure race through Shoto's body and he shivers, opening his mouth to let Kotsky's demanding tongue invade his mouth with a hungry growl. It was all bad. Shoto knew it was bad. So why? God, why did it feel so fucking right? Their mouths, like their bodies, moved together perfectly. There was no awkward teeth clashing or pauses to let the other readjust. They just flowed together, following the other naturally. When Shoto finally breaks the kiss, gasping for air, he knows he's doomed. He had fallen for this fucking maniac villain. This sadist, masochist psychopath had stolen his mind, body, and fucking soul without even asking Shoto for permission. Something must have shown on his face because Katsuki's eyes darken and he yanks Shoto back down for another hungry kiss, eating up Shoto's pathetic moan like candy, and not letting up again until the hero forcefully pushes himself off Katsuki's chest for air. Fuck, he says, breathless, and the blonde chuckles, letting his hands trail down Shoto's arms, watching his muscles flex under his fingers.
Stay the night,
Katsuki murmurs, and it takes every ounce of willpower for Shoto not to jump at the offer like a starved puppy. It was bad idea, but fuck, it sounded good. He was tired of sleeping alone. All right, he says finally, and the smile that spreads across Katsuki's face makes the hero melt. He really did look fucking amazing when he smiled. Fuck. This was all trouble. Present day, and Shoto wasn't anywhere closer to resolving his feelings. He thought maybe by some fucking miracle either he or Katsuki would get tired of this arrangement and call it quits. But no. The opposite happened. He started feeling a harsh loneliness on the days him and Katsuki didn't hook up. It was distracting. It made him irritable to the point even his teammates noticed. What was worse, him and Katsuki had silently agreed to not interfere with each other on the field, so he couldn't even see the blonde. Shoto had started texting Katsuki more than once that day, but deleted it before sending. He was being clingy. They had just met up 2 days ago and spent the night together. Another thing that made his bachelor life even more miserable. Waking up to someone was wonderful, especially when that someone looked at him with heated eyes seconds after waking up and held him so tightly and kissed him so fucking passionately. Fuck. He was fucked. They met up a few days later, and after Katsuki fucking destroyed his fucking phone had buzzed, cutting their night short. He couldn't catch a break. Katsuki was watching him closely as he dressed, but he refused to make eye contact. He couldn't hide it, not from the blonde, not when he felt so raw right then.
Shoto, your hair.
Before he can back away, Katsuki's hands are in his hair, smoothing the tresses down from where he had been pulling on them violently just minutes ago, and letting his fingers linger on the hero's cheek. He couldn't take it. He couldn't handle the gentle touches, the lingering looks and feather-like kisses on his temple when they cuddled in bed. He clenches his fists and lets out a shaky breath. What are we doing, Katsuki? Katsuki's whole body stiffens and Shoto regrets the words immediately. But he couldn't fucking take this any longer. Whatever this was, for fuck's sake. Katsuki lets his hands fall to his sides and he takes a deep breath. Then his demeanor changes. The old smug smirk that Shoto hadn't seen in months comes crawling back to replace the soft smile on the blonde's face. Huh. He snorts and Shoto can feel his heart clenching tighter. No, that tone was all wrong. Why was he acting this way?
Guess I'll break the news to you. I'm done.
Shoto whips his head up, eyes wide in surprise. No, don't do that. What? He didn't hear correctly. Katsuki didn't meet his gaze as he finishes pulling on the rest of his uniform.
Yeah, I'm bored. Fighting was more fun.
You don't mean...
I do.
Katsuki cuts him off harshly and Shoto sucks in a breath. This was not how he thought Katsuki would react. Not even close. Did he really misread the blonde this whole time? Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. Had this really been one-sided? Were the gentle touches and soft kisses just Katsuki playing him? Look at me, Katsuki. He whispers, voice pained. He couldn't do this. It wasn't real. Katsuki was just messing with him.
Like I'd give you the satisfaction. Don't get so familiar with a stranger, idiot.
The voice wasn't Katsuki. It was Ground Zero. It was all fucking wrong. He lets out a strangled noise, unsure how to react. He couldn't deal with this new information.
Anyway, see you on the battlefield, Icy Hot.
The old nickname is a knife through Shoto's heart. He lets out a harsh laugh, so fucking done with this. His body trembles, trying to keep his feelings in check. Next time I see you, I will kill you, Ground Zero. His voice doesn't sound like his own, and he gets no pleasure seeing Katsuki flinch at his villain name. He didn't think anything could give him pleasure again. The blonde leaves the room without another word, and Shoto just stands there, watching the door close. It was fine, really. He was just back to where he was 6 months ago. No big deal. Right. 3 months later, and it was a big deal. He couldn't put the effort in to care that people were in trouble. He didn't care about his image, or his attitude, or his anything, really. His teammates all tried to talk to him one-on-one, but he never had a close relationship with any of them. And none of them knew how to handle him. They knew nothing about the real him. The real him that was fucking dead now. He smiles wryly at the thought, slowly making his way to a new crime scene. Hadn't he thought of dying 9 months ago? Who would have thought that he could be dead but still living? The news had been paid off not to show him most of the time. The country didn't need to see their savior looking like a fucked up maniac zombie. It was fine. He didn't care anymore. Shoto arrives on the scene, looking it over with no sense of urgency. The police had the building surrounded. The sounds of fighting and shouts rang out from one of the middle floors, and Shoto moves to join them when someone large rams into his right side, sending him flying back into a police car. He gags, spitting out blood from biting his tongue, and scowls. He wanted this to end quickly and go home. Not have to go to the fucking hospital. Granted, he should have seen a weak-ass attack coming, but really, he wasn't worried. None of these villains were a challenge. Only one could beat him, and he had been MIA for the last 3 months. Really, though, the guy flat-out rejects Shoto and then disappears. Who fucking does that? Shoto growls, mismatched eyes flashing with unveiled anger. The villain, some tank rhino, actually takes a step back at the look of pure hatred. "You have to earn the right to fucking touch me, you piece of shit," he yells and sends a fiery blast at the rhino that he had no hope of dodging. The creature screams as the flames eat at his skin, and the sound fuels Shoto's hatred to higher levels. "Equilibrium, stop! You'll kill him!" Someone yells behind him, and he scowls, half tempted to ignore the request. His fun already cut short. "Whatever," he mutters, extinguishing the flames and letting the on-site fire truck douse the shrieking villain in water.
"That was pretty cruel for a pro hero."
The deep voice sends a hot thrill down Shoto's spine, but he doesn't show it. No, he was beyond that. He turns to face Ground Zero, and the blonde isn't grinning. Shoto doesn't remember seeing him frown like he was now. It didn't look good on him. "You'd know all about being cruel, Ground Zero." He snarls, and his left side explodes into uncontrolled flames. Just seeing the blonde was enough to spike him into rage. He was so angry and hurt, and he just wanted to feel that softness again, but he knew it was gone. And that's what hurt the most. Katsuki had ended it. It seemed fitting that the blonde came to deal with what he created. Katsuki's frown deepened, and he hops down from the police car he had been perched on.
"Stop. You aren't in control."
That arrogant, commanding voice was like nails on a chalkboard. Shoto laughs. He tosses his head back, laughing harshly at how cruel fate could be. He was done. He'd take Katsuki down with him. He'd take half the fucking city down with him if he had to. "Shut the fuck up!" he screams, unleashing his fire in an explosion that didn't distinguish from friend or foe. The police shout and leap away, pushing back the curious onlookers hastily. No, they weren't safe. He didn't care what he looked like. Let them shout profanities at him and spit on his name. "You idiot!" Katsuki springs towards him, making to restrain him, but he couldn't get close, not when Shoto's side was a flaming inferno. "Don't touch me, just fucking die." Shoto flings his left arm out, sending a blazing vortex towards the blonde, who leaps out of the way easily. "You're being reckless. You can't fucking hit me with that shitty-ass aim." "Shut up, shut up, shut up." Ice springs from his right foot, shooting up into a monstrous frozen wave, taking out the buildings around Katsuki. People shriek as they run, trying to escape the falling debris. A crowd had formed around them. Some were pro-heroes who had just arrived. Some were villains. All had stopped fighting to watch them. His ears were ringing from all the noise. So much noise. Why couldn't they all just shut up? Kotsky lands in front of him a handful of yards away, shaking off the frost that had caught him.
Shoto, stop.
His voice is so low no one else can hear. It was so soft, gentle. He hated that voice.
You can't say my name. Don't say my name.
His voice pitched up with each word, and to his horror, tears pricked his eyes. No, not here. Why did he let this villain get so close? Why couldn't he just blast him and be done with it? His fists tremble and he feels his anger diminish slightly. He just couldn't. Even with all that fucking anger, he couldn't hurt Kotsky. Just leave me alone. He finally murmurs, voice strained with hurt. He couldn't deal with this pain. Screams erupt from behind him, and he turns in time to see a glint of metal as a shot rings out from the roof. What quirk was it? How did he deflect it? His body wouldn't move. He was too overwhelmed. Fuck. Hands push him from behind. A familiar voice shouting at him to move. Then he's falling to the ground and something heavy lands on top of him. Shouts ring out higher than ever around him as the fighting reinstates. Why was everyone so surprised? He breathes hard and turns to see Kotsky lying on him, unresponsive. Wait. What happened? Suddenly, hands are reaching for the villain, lifting him off Shoto, letting the pro-hero stand. He looks down at the blonde numbly, eyes tracing the small dart lodged in his neck. He was breathing, thankfully. Must be some type of tranquilizer.
Equilibrium, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?
A couple police approach him, looking genuinely concerned for his well-being. Didn't he just try to kill them all?
One of the villains has a possessive quirk. They were possessing you.
One said quickly upon seeing his confused face. Right. Possessing him. He clenches and unclenches his fists several times, trying to speak, but nothing came out. Seriously. He couldn't even properly go berserk without someone coming up with an excuse for his actions. Once their leader fell, the villain's efforts diminished and the fighting ended minutes later. The most wanted villain was down. Cheers erupted around him, but he barely heard them. He watches Kotsky's chest rise and fall slowly. He'd taken a bullet for him. Granted, it wasn't lethal, but still. What the ever-loving fuck is going on? The penitentiary where Bakugou Kotsky, alias Ground Zero, was currently being held was the most secure place in Japan. He's been captive for a little over 2 months. The #1 pro-hero, Todoroki Shoto, was back to his usual pro-hero work. As far as everyone knew, things were peaceful once again. Shoto smirks as he looks up at the tall wall surrounding the penitentiary. It had been hard playing normal. He almost forgot how to be nice to people, to act like he cared. Now, though, he could exact his plan. The group of villains behind him stands silently, waiting for their second-in-command to give the signal. It hadn't been hard to track down one of the villains he had seen with Kotsky. They had all seen him that day. They had all tasted his bloodlust. They all had seen his maniac showing. No fucking quirk had made him act that day. Now it was time to rescue their leader.
Move out,
he says softly, and they obey, following his carefully laid out plan to the T. It's not long before Shoto has a clear path to Kotsky's holding cell. His heart thrums loudly in his ears as he approaches. He had thought of what to say when he could finally see the blonde again, but really, nothing sounded right. I'm sorry for being a basket case. This is your fault, asshat. I missed you. He cringes at how needy the last one sounds in his head. He reaches the cell, noting the thick glass on the front of it. Kotsky's tied down in the middle of the room, which looked to be refrigerated. His hands are shackled behind him with thick chains connecting to the floor, and he has a muzzle on, also connected to the floor.
Seems a little overkill.
He says the first thing that comes to mind, because holy shit, it was excessive. They really didn't want this guy to sweat, talk, or move. The blonde's head jerks up at his voice, red eyes widening in disbelief. If Shoto had any lingering doubts about how the villain Ground Zero felt, then the muffled Shoto he hears would have dashed them away completely. He sounded happy, relieved. Katsuki. He smiles for the first time in months and presses a hand to the glass. It was cold and thick, but breakable. It wasn't designed to withstand force, just to keep the cold in. Brace yourself. The blonde ducks his head down best as he can, as Shoto slams the glass with an icy fist, easily shattering it around them. Shouts are heard down the hall, and he hurriedly reaches the blonde. His team had done well, but there was just too much security in this place. He freezes the shackles so they shatter and unbuckles the muzzle. He opens his mouth to explain their escape plan, but the blonde cuts him off, smashing his mouth against the ex-heroes in a frantic, sloppy kiss. Shoto moans against the blonde's cold mouth, dipping his tongue in and tasting every corner. He had missed this so much, missed everything.
Shoto.
I missed you. He cuts the blonde off, resuming their kiss until footsteps pound down the hall towards them and stop outside the cell. They finally break, and Katsuki looks over his shoulder with a scowl.
I'm guessing you.
I've got a plan.
Fucking stop interrupting me.
Shoto grins and stands, pulling his partner up with him. He had missed that yelling. They turn towards the group of heavily armed men. How about we heat things up, boys? Katsuki snorts out a laugh and flexes his hands. Shoto's side blazes, turning the small room into a sauna in seconds. We aren't afraid of sweating, you traitor. One man has the balls to yell, and Shoto grins widely, surprising the group. Oh, but it's not your sweat I care about. Katsuki rolls his shoulders, feeling the sweat beading on his hands.
Eat shit, motherfuckers.
He yells, flinging out his hands towards the group who don't move, unsure of what's happening. See ya. Shoto sends out a burst of flames, igniting the droplets right in their faces. They scream as the explosion sears their skin. Some of them struggle to drop their weapons, slowly melting to their hands. It was glorious. Katsuki sends a blast into the ceiling, standing close to Shoto, and the other raises them through the roof on a pillar of ice, successfully executing their escape. They reunite with the team back at the base, and a party ensues, to which Katsuki makes a surprising announcement. He was resigning from his group.
This country's too small for both me and Shoto. We're going to the States.
The blonde states, and Shoto blinks at him, surprised, but his heart soars. Katsuki was taking him too. He wasn't leaving him behind.
I made contact with a guy called Chisaki. Seems fucking psycho, just our type.
He grins as the others shout and cheer at that.
You guys keep a hold of Japan. We'll be back.
With that, he bows out, grabbing Shoto's hand as he goes and leads him to a small room in the back. The group resumes their festivities, leaving the leaders alone. As soon as the door is shut, Katsuki slams his back against the wall, pressing the length of his hard body against Shoto's and kisses him. It wasn't hard like Shoto expected. It was soft, gentle. He sighs happily against the blonde's lips, bringing his arms up to wrap around Katsuki's neck.
Shoto.
He starts, pulling back enough to look into the other's eyes. Shoto meets his gaze with a smile.
Don't let me be a prideful dumbass again when it comes to us. Got it?
Shoto chuckles softly, pulling the blonde closer for another kiss. I don't know. That kinda hurt.
Kinda.
Okay, maybe more than kinda.
More like a lot. You were fucking insane that day.
Did you get hot watching me? Katsuki grins against his mouth, slotting his knee between Shoto's.
Fuck yeah, I did, you crazy fucker. I didn't know whether to stop you or pull out my phone to get that shit filmed.
Shoto leans back against the wall and laughs hard, tilting his head so the blonde can drag his tongue down his throat. He moans softly, pushing Katsuki's head down harder. He gets the hint and starts nipping his skin, every time making Shoto jolt and gasp.
Let's not wait that long again.
Shoto groans into the blonde's mouth and Katsuki smiles, nibbling affectionately on Shoto's lower lip.
Don't worry about that. You aren't leaving my fucking side ever again.